we'll get everything going. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Deborah Schaefer-Seaman. I am RAVSAK's Network Weaver, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the second in our Torah Lishma Learning for Learning's Sake series. Today, we are honored to have Rabbi Dr. Ron Wolfson with us. Rabbi Dr. Ron Wolfson is a visionary leader of American Jewry and truly an inspirational speaker. He travels the world telling his entertaining and his motivational stories of family, of community, and of spiritual discovery. He is the Finger Hut Professor of Education at American Jewish University. He's a co-founder of Synagogue 3000 and an author of many, many books, some of which you'll see on your screen here today. Ron lives in Los Angeles with his wife Susie, and my favorite fun fact is that he eats frozen yogurt every single day. Rabbi Dr. Ron Wolfson, welcome. It is such a pleasure and honor.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah, and welcome to everybody on the call. It's great to be with the RAVSAK community. I am a huge supporter of Jewish day schools. Both my kids went to Jewish day schools. And now I'm proud to say that my two grandchildren are going to Jewish day schools. In fact, the first one's name is Ellie Brooklyn. You might ask, why do I have a grandchild named Brooklyn? My mother, may she rest in peace, was Bernice, and she passed away just before Ellie was born, so they wanted a B in the name. My father was from Brooklyn, may he rest in peace. My son-in-law's mother is from Brooklyn, and Brooklyn is a hot place right now. So when they named her Ellie Brooklyn, I called my colleague, Rabbi Larry Hoffman at Hebrew Union College in New York. I said, Larry, give me a mazel tov. I have my first grandchild. Her name is Ellie Brooklyn. So he tells me from New York, Ron, you're going to have 4 more grandchildren. Manhattan, Staten, Queens, or you can call her Malka. And if you have a boy, you could call him the Bronx.
I love it.
Well, they called him Gabe, and his 3rd birthday is tomorrow. And Ellie Brooklyn next week has her interview for the Hausner Jewish Community Day School in Palo Alto. So I'm very excited that both my grandchildren will likely be day school kids as well. So what I wanted to share with you today is some learning that I did because of one of our great colleagues in Jewish day school education, Dr. Bruce Powell. Many of you probably know Bruce. Bruce has been one of the great leaders of Jewish day school education in the world. He now is the head of school at the Toledo High School here in Los Angeles, which was the new community Jewish high school. And I had Bruce speak with some of my students at American Jewish University one day a few years ago. And he said that the mission of his Jewish day school, high school in this case, was not just to get kids the greatest education they could in the subject matter areas, but to encourage them to be A+ human beings and to be able to answer the questions that are put to us by Rava in Shabbat 31a, the questions you're asked in heaven. And his goal as a Jewish day school educator was to enable his students to answer those questions affirmatively. So when I heard that, it sparked an idea in me, and I ended up writing a book called The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven, Reviewing and Renewing Your Life on Earth. And to do this book, I began to do some research by literally asking everybody I saw for about 6 months, hey, when you get to heaven, what do you think you'll be asked about your life on earth? What are the questions you'll be asked? So I'd like to begin our study together by asking you that question. If you have an answer, unmute your button and share it with your colleagues. What do you think you'll be asked? What's the question you'll be asked when you get to heaven about how you lived your life on earth? Deborah, you got one?
The question that I would be asked, wow. I think that I would be asked, did I fulfill my potential?
Okay, good. Anybody else? Oh, come on, don't be shy.
Rabbi Chayton, jump in.
I believe one of the questions are, were you honest and fair in your business dealings with others?
Ah, very good. Thank you, Rabbi. We're going to get there in a minute. But what I'd like you to do is think about what you think, what would your students say? Or what would the parents of your students say if you ask them that question? In fact, when I teach this to students and to adults in Scholar Residence weekends, I actually have them turn to each other and ask them to answer this question. What's the question? What are the questions you'll be asked? So just because of time, let me tell you what I hear a lot. What I hear is, was I a good person? Did I make the world a better place? Did I fulfill the mitzvahs? Was I a good person? You know, questions like that. Now, when I was doing this research, I asked my mom this question. She knew I was working on the book. And her answer was, I think I'm going to be asked, was I a good mom? Was I a good sister? Was I a good daughter? Was I a good wife? Which are great questions. And but I said, Mom, those are kind of like about family. What do you think you'll be asked about how you lived your life on earth? And she thought a minute, and then she said, was I honest in my business? Exactly the rabbi's question. And it is, of course, the first question of Rabbas in 31a. And I must tell you, this is shocking to most people. I'm sure the text is up. And if you look at the text from Shabbat 31a, here we go. The Gemara presents an alternative exposition of this verse. Amar Rava, Adam Ladin, when they escort a person to his or her final heavenly judgment after his death, Omrim lo, the heavenly tribunal says to him or her, Nasata v'natata be'emunah. Here the translation is, did you conduct your business transactions faithfully? Whoa, wait a minute. That's the first question you're going to be asked when you get to heaven about how you lived your life on earth. Not were you a good person, not did you make the world a better place, not were you a good Jew. The first question is, were you honest in your business? This is shocking to a lot of people, and I think it would be to your students too. And what I try to do in the book, and what I'd like to do with you today, is go underneath the question. What is the question really asking? Were you honest in your business? And in the book, what I try to do, as I do in most of my teaching, I tell stories, true stories that I hear, that I read, about how people might illustrate this point. So my favorite story in this question in the book comes from the wife of my publisher. Her name is Antoinette Matlin. Stuart Matlin is the publisher of Jewish Lights Publishing. Antoinette is one of the world's experts in evaluating fine diamonds, gemstones, emeralds, rubies, and so on. She's written a number of guidebooks about evaluating jewelry, and she knew I was working on the book, and she told me the following true story. she was on a cruise ship in the Caribbean and did a workshop. You know, when you go on these cruise ships, apparently there are these experts that come on the ship and they give little workshops. So she's giving a workshop on how to use a loop. You know what a loop is? An L-O-U-P-E. A loop is a little magnifying glass that you use to evaluate diamonds and other kinds of gems. So she's giving this workshop on how to use a loop, and there's a guy in the audience sitting with his arms crossed, you know, kind of like, you can't teach me nothing. And she knows there are people like that, so she doesn't pay much attention to him. And she finishes the workshop, and the guy says to her at the end of the workshop, you know, in the next port, I'm going to my trusted jeweler of 30 years. My wife and I are celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. I'm going to find 5 beautiful diamonds. I'm going to buy them, and I'm going to make a ring for my wife for our anniversary. She said, well, wonderful. Have a good port visit. The next morning, before people leave the ship, this guy comes to Antoinette at breakfast and says, Antoinette, you know, you were teaching us about this loop. May I borrow it? Well, Antoinette was thrilled, and she lends him the loop. And he goes to his jeweler in this port and says, look, I'd love to buy my wife 5 diamonds. I'm going to make a ring for her anniversary. I want your 5 best diamonds. And the jeweler goes in the back, and he comes out with a black felt tray, and there are 5 beautiful diamonds. And it was only then that this man pulled the loop out of his pocket to look at the diamonds. And what do you think happened next? He grabs the tray away from this man and runs into the back with it, muttering something like, oh, I remember something better just came in. Well, this man with the loop was devastated because he realized in that moment that this jeweler probably had been selling him jewels under false pretenses for many years. So, of course, he left the jewelry store immediately, comes back to the ship, finds Antoinette, hands her the loop, and says, Antoinette, thank you so much for teaching me about the loop, because it not only enabled me to see the imperfections in the stone, but the imperfections in the jeweler. So what's underneath this question of Ravas, the first question you're asked in heaven? I think it's all about relationships. That's another book I've done recently called Relational Judaism. I think that the question Rava is asking is really, can you be trusted in your relationship? Not just in business, but in all of your relationships. Because if you can't be trusted in business, can you be trusted in anything else? If you can't be trusted as a human being, can we trust your faith in God? I think the question underneath the question is not just honesty in business, but it's honesty in all your relationships. Okay, let's look at the second question of Rava's. Kavata itim la Torah. Did you set aside fixed times for Torah study? Well, congratulations, everybody. You're in. Thanks for joining us. Oh, and by the way, may I thank Deborah and Lisa and Sally and Mark Kramer and everybody at RAVSAK for inviting me to this fixed time for Torah study. I so look forward to it. So the question is, did you fix a time for Torah study? Well, what's underneath the question? Is it just about Torah study, or is it about fixing a time for Torah study? Because if you don't fix a time for Torah study, perhaps you won't study. And as you know, the rabbis were insistent that we study because that leads to a life of good deeds. So some of you may know my colleague and friend, Rabbi David Wolpe, out here in Los Angeles. David was hired by the then University of Judaism, now American Jewish University, right out of Jewish Theological Seminary to be our librarian. Now, did David Wolpe know anything about being a librarian? He knew nothing about being a librarian. He has confirmed that to me. But our president at the time, Dr. David Lieber, knew this young, bright rabbi would be a great addition to our faculty and our staff. So he hired him as the librarian. And David Wolpe said something to a group of patrons of our library once that has stayed with me forever. He said, when I walk through the stacks of the library, I don't see books. I hear the voices of authors saying, pick me up and let me teach you. Say ulmad, let me teach you what I've learned about living. And I've always loved that. I thought it was just a great insight into the importance of study, the importance of our texts. Rabbi Louis Finkelstein, who was a chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, was once said to say that prayer is the way we talk to God, but study is the way we hear God's voice. So to encourage your students and their parents and grandparents to fix a time to study, I think is one of the great things we can do in day school education. And by the way, just a little commercial for reaching out to those parents and grandparents. We're so busy in making our schools the best they can be for our children, but know that your influence in day school education extends far beyond the classroom and the school into those families. So whether you partner with other synagogues or institutions or you do it yourself, to encourage adults to study as part of your school community, I think is really a very important task we all have. So let's look at the third question of Rava's. Here it is. Asakta befria uravia. Did you engage in procreation? Did you have kids? Now, this is a tough question. And you know why it's tough. It's tough because there are plenty of people who cannot have children, although they try mightily. There are some who decide not to have children, and that's certainly a decision that some people make. Again, I'm interested in what's underneath Rava's question here. Did you have children? And I think the underlying question is, did you leave a legacy? Did you make an impact on the next generation, as all of you are doing in your sacred work of education? So I'm the legacy of my Zaidi, my grandfather, Louis Perperny. I just wrote a book called The Best Boy in the United States of America that starts with this story. My Zaidi Louis was about 5 foot, maybe, more like 4'11". He was a Russian immigrant from Minsk who came to Omaha, Nebraska to be a peddler of fruits and vegetables, because the Union Pacific Railroad started in Omaha and went to San Francisco. So it attracted Jews out of New York who didn't like the crowd. And my Zaidi Louis was a very successful businessman. His peddling cart turned into a roadside fruit stand and eventually the first modern supermarket in Nebraska. And he loved his grandchildren. When we would go over to Bubby and Zaidi's house, first thing we'd do is grab a bunch of mandel bread. We called them Bubby's cookies. They were studded with walnuts and smothered in cinnamon sugar. And then we go around the corner out of the kitchen into the living room, and there Zaidi sat like a king in a big red velvet chair. And when he saw one of us grandchildren, many times me, I would run into his lap, and he had these enormous arms and legs because of his lugging around big, heavy sacks of vegetables and fruit. And he would put me in a leg lock like a World Wrestling Federation brawler. I'm 6 years old, and he would give me this huge, wet, scratchy kiss right on the lips. And then he would look me in the eye and he would say, "Ronnie, you're the best boy in the United States of America." And I'd say, "Zadie, I know," because he did this every time when I saw him. "Let me go, Zadie." No. He'd look me in the eye again. He'd say, "Ronnie, you're the best boy in the United States of America." And then he would do it a third time. "Ronnie, you're the best boy in the United States of America." I said, "Zadie, I know, let me go." And he finally let me go. And then my brother Bobby would come around the corner, and he would jump into Zadie's lap. And Zadie would give him a big, wet, scratchy kiss and look him straight in the eye and say, "Bobby, you're the best boy in the United States of America." And then my brother Dougie, "You're the best boy in the United States of America." And you know what? To him, my Zadie Louie, every one of his 9 grandchildren were the best boy or best girl in his beloved United States of America that gave him everything. And the very fact that I'm telling you this story today means I am his legacy. I am remembering him. And he did influence me. When our daughter was married, Rabbi Ed Feinstein said something to them at the Bedekin that I'll never forget. He said, "Look, until now you've been surrounded by those who love you because you are their descendant. But now that you're getting married, you're going to the chuppah, you have the potential to be an ancestor. And whether you have children or you mentor children or you teach children or your big brother or your big sister, I think the question that Rav is asking here is, do you have what my late rabbi, alav shalom, Rabbi Harold Schulweis, called the immortality of influence? So let's look at the next question of Rava's. Here it is. Sipita lishua. Did you wait in hope for the messianic salvation in this translation? So you know Yeshua is salvation and Sipita is the word for hope. So this is a question about your attitude in life. Did you live your life in hope or did you live your life in fear? And there's a thin line between the two emotions. And have you ever been in a waiting room in a hospital? So a few years ago, I was with my wife, Susie. We had been on a long trip to Australia where I was teaching, and Susie had done quite well on the flights, but she was having trouble walking from the gate to the baggage claim. She was short of breath. And my dad, alav shalom, was a heart patient for many years. So I knew that something was wrong. And I said to Susie, look, when we get back to Los Angeles, we have to see a doctor. And it was only then that she admitted to me that she wasn't feeling well. So when we got back to LA, we go to a doctor, and the doctor sends us immediately to a cardiologist. And the cardiologist sends Susie immediately for a test. And within a couple of hours, Susie was on a gurney being wheeled into a catheterization laboratory for what's called an angiogram. This is many of you are familiar with it, I'm sure. It's a test to see if you have any blockages in your heart. And this happened so fast that our children couldn't come, so I'm all by myself in a waiting room at Kaiser Hospital in Los Angeles with my wife undergoing this very serious test. And I'm telling you, folks, I didn't know whether to be hopeful or fearful, and I was a little bit of both. I hoped that the test would find something, but then I was fearful if they found something in her heart and it couldn't be fixed right away, she would have to have open heart surgery. And my dad and my father-in-law both had that, and I couldn't imagine it. So I would vacillate between these two emotions of hope and fear. And after about an hour, the doctor shows up at the door of the waiting room, and he says, Mr. Wolfson, he says, your wife did fine, so my hope temperature went way up. And then he said, but we found something, and my fear factor kicked in. And I said, what did you find? And he said, we found a 95% blockage in the artery of her heart. But we were able to balloon it and stent it, and she should do just fine. So my hope factor went up. And about an hour later, I was able to see her in the recovery room, and she said, oh, Ronnie, said, I was awake through the whole thing. I watched it on a big screen television in the laboratory, and we dodged a bullet, and I just lost it. I completely lost it. I'm like crying like a baby. And I kissed her, and I said, look, thank God we checked this out. And in the weeks that followed, friends would call and they would say, hey, Ronnie, how's Susie doing? And I'd say, oh, she's doing great now. She's really on her diabetes medicine. She got herself a personal trainer. She's on a new diet. She's got the fear of God in her. I don't know if you've heard that expression. I've heard it many times. She's got the fear of God in her. And one time I caught myself and I said, she doesn't have the fear of God in her. She has the hope of God in her. So I think underneath this question of Ravas is not just about, will the Messiah come? It's really about our attitude in life. And it's something I hope you can share with your students and their families, that we ought to be living our lives in hope and not in fear. So let me tell you what I did with the next two questions, because I believe they're related. In my book, I combine them. So here they are. Pilpalta b'chokhmah, did you delve into wisdom, is the translation here. Pilpel is the way you study Gemara. So did you really look at the text, the chokhmah, with wisdom? And then the next question that I combine in the book is, Havanta davar mitoch davar. When you learn Torah, did you learn it deeply and infer davar mitoch davar, one thing from another? Now, I think they're related because they both, on the surface of it, look like the Rav is talking about the way you study and what you get out of it. What I get from this, underneath the questions of Rava, is that wisdom, the chokhmah, comes from hard-won wisdom of experience. And bina is our intellectual capabilities. So if you combine chokhmah and bina, wisdom and intellectual understanding, then davar mitoch davar, you can decide one thing from another. You can figure out what's really important. And from this, I deduce the following question I believe you're going to get asked in heaven. Did you figure out your priorities? This is the opposite of the great Yiddish word, dre. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And my favorite version of dre is dre cup. Dre cup means a spinning head. My mom was a spinning head. She was an entrepreneur. She was in business most of her life, even in the 50s. My brother is a Dre Cup. I'm something of a Dre Cup. Always thinking about what's next. And my dad, Alan, was a particularly interesting Dre Cup. He was an inventor. And he, for years, after leaving the Army in 1945 as a dental technician, he dreamed of creating a toothbrush that would brush both sides of your teeth at the same time. Now, on the surface of it, that sounds ridiculous, but he thought it would be good for elderly people, for children, maybe even for animals. And he couldn't quite get his invention going until one day he's doing his cardiac rehab walk in a shopping mall, and he sees a guy with a floor polisher. You know what a brush and a floor polisher looks like? It's kind of round. So he got this eureka moment, and he said, what if I take two brushes, round brushes, and I put them opposite each other, and I articulate them opposite each other, and your teeth go in the middle of these two brushes, and you put it on an electric wand, and the brushes go opposite each other, and you brush both sides of your teeth at the same time. I'm telling you, we thought it was crazy, but my dad was a Dre Cup, and he was convinced that it would be great, and he manufactured a prototype and took it to an inventor's fair in Nebraska City, Nebraska, and a guy found it and sold it to the Epilady people. Some of you are my age maybe, or a little younger, and you might remember Epilady was a device created by a South African Jewish family, manufactured on a kibbutz in Israel, that literally pulled the hair out of ladies' legs. And they were a huge success, a marketing genius. They sold their appliances not in the appliance section of a department store, but in the cosmetic aisle, like at places like Bloomingdale's. And they bought my dad's invention and were ready to make it their next big product. And I actually saw it being sold. I took my parents to New York, and they saw it being sold on the cosmetics aisle at Bloomingdale's. You would have thought my dad had won the Nobel Prize. But the very next week, one of the daughters in the South African Jewish family had invested $4 million of the family fortune in a Broadway play that opened on Thursday and closed on Friday. And it turns out this Epilady device was a torture instrument. They sold millions, but got millions in return. And just as my dad's product was coming to the market, the company went bankrupt. And it was devastating to my dad, but I said to him, Dad, a lot of people never see their invention see the light of day. Your draying eventually created a product that another company bought, and it was sold for many years as a children's toothbrush. And that's what happens when the draying stops. There's a great line from Rabbi Eliezer, Shuv yom echad lifnei b'tatak, repent one day before you die. There's only one problem with this. How do you know exactly when you're going to die? So Rabbi Eliezer continues, Kol sheken sheyaset teshuvah hayom shemal yamut lemachar. You should repent, you should return every day, because who knows what tomorrow will bring. So my point is that underneath this question of using your chachma and your bina to figure out your priorities, you'll figure out what was really important in your life, because understanding what matters is what leads to a life that matters. I'll say that again. Understanding what matters leads you to a life that matters. So those are the questions of Rava. And in my book, let me just spend another few minutes telling you what I do. It's called the 7 questions you're asked in heaven. So I combine Rava's last 2 questions into one. And then I have 2 other questions from 2 famous rabbis. You probably know about this, but just to review it briefly, I think they're great questions. Because the rabbis over the generations have imagined you're going to be asked questions when you get to heaven about how you lived your life on earth. So the sixth question in my book comes from Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the founder of modern Orthodoxy, who is in Germany, and he was on his deathbed, and the story is told that his students surrounded him and said, "Rabbi, is there anything we can do for you?" And Rabbi Hirsch said, "Yes, take me to Switzerland." Take me to Switzerland? The students couldn't believe it. They said, "Rabbi, why do you want to go to Switzerland? You're so ill." And Rabbi Hirsch answered, "Because soon I will meet the Almighty. And what will I say to the Almighty? How will I answer the Almighty when I'm asked this question? Did you see my Alps? Did you see my Alps?" This is the bucket list question. You might remember that movie with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson called The Bucket List, where these two guys know they're going to die, and they make a list of things they want to do before they die. This comes from a whole genre of literature. You might know the book 1001 Places to See Before You Die. There's a book called 1001 Recordings to Hear Before You Die. There's a book called 1001 Senior Moments, of which we could only remember 246. That's a good book. This question is not about what you did in your life, it's about what you didn't do in your life. And I think what's amazing about Judaism is it teaches us that we're permitted to do just about everything, except one day of the year. One day of the year, we're not allowed to do anything except study or go to a synagogue. And that day is Yom Kippur, my favorite day of the year. It is the spiritual high of my year. I love, love, love Yom Kippur because it's the moment when I do what this book is asking us to do, and I think Rav's questions, and all these questions are asking us to do, the process of Cheshbon HaNefesh, of the spiritual accounting of the soul. So I do many of the traditional practices of the day. I fast all day. I'm in synagogue almost all of the day. I don't wear leather. It's a sign of luxury. I don't bathe, shave, or wear cologne. I don't have intimate relationships with my wife. She doesn't mind because I don't bathe, shave, or wear cologne. A friend of mine next door goes a step further. He wears a white robe to shul along with his white sneakers. This, of course, is not a robe. It's a burial shroud because, as you know, on Yom Kippur, we are rehearsing that moment when we're going to be asked the questions we're asked in heaven. And then at the end of Yom Kippur, we do what most Jews do. We run to someone's family, famished, and we have a big break fast. And the best break fast in the United States of America is offered by my cousins Don and Nancy Greenberg in Omaha, Nebraska. For 40 years, they have hosted 120 people to their home for a spectacular break fast. And the star of the break fast is not Pam Strudel or Nancy's Blintzes. It's the fact that Don and Nancy Greenberg in Omaha, Nebraska, every year import to Omaha, Nebraska, to landlocked Jews, smoked fish from Barney Greengrass in New York City. Now, I have to tell you, huge whitefish and Nova lox and creamed herring, and I mean, you cannot believe the fish, the smoked fish that they bring in for this break fast, and it is the attraction for Don and Nancy Greenberg's break fast. So a number of years ago, I'm in New York for a meeting, and I have it at Barney Greengrass in the Upper West Side, and at the end of the meeting, I go to pay the bill, and there's this big corpulent guy, the owner of Barney Greengrass at the time, Mo Greengrass. He's sitting behind the front counter next to the cash register, and he's looking at all these papers in front of him, and he's paying no attention to me. And I want to engage him in conversation because I'm a relational kind of guy. So I say to him, hey, my name is Ron Wolfson. You don't know me. I'm from Los Angeles, but I think you know my cousins, Don and Nancy Greenberg from Omaha, Nebraska. And this guy, Mo Greengrass, with his head in the papers, slowly raises his head, looks me straight in the eye, and says, good account. Good account. 9104 Davenport, Omaha, Nebraska, 68114. From the heart. By heart, he knew their address. Good account. That's the goal of Yom Kippur. It's the goal of Cheshbon HaNefesh, and it's the goal of my book here, The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven. So what's the 7th question you're asked in heaven? It's the famous question of Rabbi Zusia, the Hasidic rabbi. You know the story. He also is on his deathbed. Students ask him if he's afraid of facing the end, and he says, I'm not afraid that when I get to heaven, I'll be asked, why were you not Moses? Why were you not King David? But I am afraid I'll be asked, why were you not Zusia? So some of you, again, may be in my generation. You might remember a great commercial from the 20th century that went like this: be all that you can be. And you couldn't watch a sports show in the last 25 years of the 20th century without hearing that commercial jingle: be all that you can be. And the end of it was, find your future in the army. Be all that you can be. This is Zusia's question. Have we, at the end of our lives, can we look back and say, did we use all of our God-given gifts and talents? We're made B'Tselem Elohim. We're made in the image of God. And that means that we can be God's partner on earth to do the sacred work of continuing creation and making the world a better place. And that's the question underneath Zusia's question. Have you been all that you can be? I did a book called God's To-Do List a few years ago, and then a kids version called Be Like God for 8 to 12-year-olds. And I recommend it to your schools. Kids like it. And the point of the book is this point: be God's partner on earth. So, my friends, I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and we can open up for conversation. I think these 7 questions you're asked in heaven are really teaching us something tremendously important, that Judaism has a notion of life after death. But as you know, it really emphasizes life before death. So were you honest in your relationships? Did you fix a time to study Torah? Did you leave a legacy and influence the next generation? Did you live with hope in your heart? Did you use your hard-won wisdom from experience and your intellectual ability to figure out your priorities and what really matters in life? Did you take advantage of everything permitted to us in life? And were you the best you could be? These are 7 questions. We can ask our students, we can ask our teachers to ask our students, we can ask our families, and we can ask ourselves. So Deborah, why don't we unmute people and see if there are any responses? We've got 10 or 12 minutes left.
Absolutely. Ron, thank you so much for walking us through that text. Inspiring, truly thought-provoking. Anybody who would like to join in the conversation, please go ahead and unmute yourself, and anyone with a camera, turn your camera back on.
I have a comment. First of all, thank you very much for walking us through the 7 questions.
My pleasure.
There's a lot of ideas that come up, and I particularly like the story of RAVSAK at the end. But the one about wisdom and knowledge, as you were talking, it sort of gave me a different spin on it I would like to share. That not only in being creative and such, but I think the question is also, were you humor in your lifetime, but were you also a contributor? Did you only take in, or did you develop? Were you creative? Did you add, and not just be a taker?
Yeah, I think that's a terrific, very terrific insight on what these questions are trying to get to. Because many of them are active, how do you do your relationships, and how do you teach the next generation, and what's your attitude in life, and how do you use your intellectual ability? And I mean, you're right. Can you be creative? That's one of the reasons I tell the story about my dad. I mean, honestly, we thought he was crazy. This one was sugar, but he was determined to use his creativity, and he got a U.S. patent on this toothbrush thing. And it's a great, even though he didn't become a rich man, he dreamt of riches. He enriched all of us with his creativity and his ability to use his creativity to contribute something useful in the world. So that's a great insight. Anyone else? Oh, well, before people log off, I want to make an offer to everybody. I have a little foundation that I lead, that was created by the famous rabbi in Omaha, Nebraska, Rabbi Meyer Kritzky. This is the rabbi who invested with Warren Buffett back in the 1960s. And it's called the Kritzky Institute for Jewish Family Literacy. And if you will send me your snail mail address in an email to me, I hope it's on the screen, ronwolfson1234@gmail.com, I will send you, on behalf of the Kritzky Institute, a copy of this book, The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven, as a gift. But I need your snail mail address and how you'd like the book inscribed, and I will make sure you get a copy of the book as a kind of thank you for joining me today.
Wow, what an amazing, amazing gift. I was expecting us to get invited to Don and Nancy Greenberg.
Well, I'm sure you could get that invitation too.
Very good. I see that Elliot Rabin has a question for you.
Please.
Yes, thank you so much. It's just such a pleasure. I was closing my eyes and listening to you tell story after story. It was such a delight. Thank you. There's been quite a lot of written in recently about the benefits of keeping one's death in mind as a way of focusing one's life. And I'm wondering if you've been following that, or if you feel that some of that is also implicit in these teachings.
Well, this is exactly why I think the book and the teaching resonates with people, is that, listen, everyone knows, that life on earth is not infinite. I mean, we're all going to face this. I think that's the brilliance of Yom Kippur, honestly. That we come face to face with that reality. And if we use that reality in a positive way, it could be very depressing, but it could also be uplifting, because it makes the point that time is short, every day is precious, every minute is precious. In the book God's To-Do List, I have I go through sort of the things that God does in the Torah and how we can emulate them. So the first thing God does is create. So back to the first point from our group, if God is creative, you can be creative. The next thing God does is bless the animals, human beings, and the Shabbat. So if God can bless, and we're made B'Tselem Elohim, we can bless. And God calls to Abraham and Sarah, Lech Lecha. Well, if God calls, you can call too. You can be called and you can call. So I say in the book, call your mother, call your father, call your kids, call your loved ones, because every minute is precious. So yeah, I have watched that with interest. And I think that, again, Judaism is so brilliant in sort of not emphasizing life after death. It's there in our texts, but it really focuses on what we should be doing now. And I think that's why I love what Bruce Powell teaches his students. Be an A+ human being and be prepared when you leave our day school. Be prepared to answer these questions affirmatively. Because if you walk out of our day school knowing how important it is to be honest in relationships, knowing that you're always going to be a lifelong learner, to influence others, to live with hope, to figure out your priorities, to enjoy everything that's permitted to you in this world, and to be the best you can be. That's a fantastic list of educational and spiritual goals. So I thank Bruce for teaching me initially how to think about the purpose of these texts and the way we can use them in our educational work.
So jumping off of that, I'm wondering, in the chat box that you can't see, Ron, people are giving you tremendous thanks for your generosity and for all that they've learned from you today.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry I'm not on the video, but I should explain. I had some surgery yesterday on my face, and I kind of look like Frankenstein right now. I'll be fine, but I didn't want to impose my punim on you all today.
We appreciate having your voice with us and the inspiration that you've brought with that. One of the things that someone mentioned is that they can't wait to share what they've taken away from the conversation today and from learning with you. I'm wondering if anybody, we as teachers don't often get that very specific feedback. Does anybody want to tell Rabbi Dr. Ron Wolfson one thing that you would like to share that you'll take away from today? Sherry, will you jump in with that? It looks like Sherry might be having trouble with her microphone. Okay.
I'll try to, wait a minute. Let me try to unmute it from the computer.
There we go. Sherry, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Oh.
Sherry, we can hear you. Go ahead. Oh.
Thank you very much. I really, really love this. And I, like each one, in every story, I was like putting down things, but number 4, I'll just the number 4 about the hope. And I guess if I would have read it myself the first time, I would go, okay, hope for messianic salvation. I don't know where that stands with me. But when you made it hope and fear, it's totally where I take my life and how I look at the situation in Israel and the situations in America, and just the big picture thing that I live my life feeling that we always have to work for hope, and not because of fear, but because of hope of what it can be, and not of fear what's going to happen if we don't or if we do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. One of the little stories in this book you'll see is about Hatikva. I mean, come on, it's our national anthem. You know, and if you, you know, politics aside, if you heard President Obama last night appealing to the country to reject this fear-mongering that's going on and to circle back to hopefulness as the way we should go forward, you know, I just think it's the way we ought to be living our lives, and I think that's exactly correct, what's underneath the question. So thank you. That's really great.
And in our last couple of minutes, I think we have time for one more comment. Tracy, Rogerio, would you like to jump in? Greg, Felicity, Stephanie? Please, okay, Rogerio, let me go ahead and unmute you. Rogerio, what would you like to tell us?
So it's still on this topic of hope and fear. I know if people believe in coincidence. Last night, I read a classic article from 1982 written by Rabbi Dr. David Hartman, Auschwitz or Sinai versus Auschwitz, something like this, in which he discusses exactly that. And I was very, very touched, and I posted it on my Facebook page. So listening, as you were talking about, this is one of the questions that will be asked, and I think not only I now live in Brazil, but I've spent a lot of time in America, and I could experience how fear sometimes can take the best of us. But I think that the world Jewish community also experiences the very concrete tension of fear and hope, and how much fear and Auschwitz define our Judaism, and how we need to replace that with hope. So thank you again for touching on that topic.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure, and kol hakavod to all of you for your sacred work in teaching and educating our children and our families. Please do send me an email. I'm very good at email. I do have a webpage, drronwolfson.com, that keeps up with some of what I'm doing. I hope the book will be helpful to you in your teaching. And if there's any other, you know, help I can offer, please don't hesitate to be in touch. And again, to everyone at RAVSAK, thank you for organizing the day. And I look forward to learning with you again soon. And happy Secular New Year. Thank you so much. It's been our honor and truly our pleasure to be inspired by you today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to learning again with you. Torah Lishma, learning for learning's sake. Next on our list is Avraham Infeld, joining us from Israel. So thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Chodesh Tov, and take care. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.